All right, get ready, because today we're going deep on happiness. Not just the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that really sticks around. We've got three sources for this one. A website that says it has the secrets to deep happiness, a pretty straightforward article with advice, and then a YouTube video that gets a bit philosophical.
An interesting mix for sure.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at how happiness connects to the things we choose to do, the things we do, and maybe even how we look at the universe, like you said.
That's a pretty big promise. One thing I noticed right off the bat in that How to Actually Be a Happier Person article was that it talks about this idea that we should be happy all the time. And let's be real, it's not really possible, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it even quotes this Dr. Emiliana Simon Thomas, who says, life is not fictionless. Right. There are going to be some rough patches. We can't avoid them.
It makes me think about all those perfect lives you see on social media. Nobody's actually happy all the time, are they?
Nope, not at all. And that YouTube video by Johnny Thompson actually suggests that trying to be happy all the time might actually stop us from finding real happiness. He describes it as a smiling soul, which sounds like it's a lot deeper than just pretending to be happy.
Like being okay with who you are, even the not-so-good parts, instead of trying to be some perfect person that doesn't exist.
Exactly. The website we're looking at today, How to Be Happy Deeply, it gives us 10 keys to unlock this deeper kind of happiness. Some of them really made me think, like giving and relating. They might seem simple at first, but they tie into some pretty cool evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, in the YouTube video, Thompson talks about how being generous and kind might have helped our ancestors survive, you know? Like the people who helped others were more likely to be part of a group, and so they were safer, right?
Right. It's like if someone was known for being selfish or not trustworthy, they wouldn't last very long.
So maybe we're actually wired to be kind, at least to some degree.
Maybe. And this idea of connecting with other people shows up in another key, awareness. Now, stay with me on this one. It might seem a bit weird, but think about it. Imagine you've been on the computer all day. You're feeling tired and kind of disconnected, and then you decide to go for a walk, and all of a sudden you start noticing the trees, the fresh air, the sounds around you.
Hold on, are you saying that a walk in the park is the key to happiness? Because, sign me up.
It's not so much about the walk itself, but the shift in your awareness that happens because of it. You can get that same shift from meditating or spending time in nature or even just really paying attention to something simple, like a cup of coffee.
So it's more about being present, being in the moment. That actually makes a lot of sense. But what about when things aren't so peaceful and enjoyable, you know, when things are rough?
That's where resilience and acceptance come in. Actually, the website quotes Viktor Frankl, who says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Pretty powerful, huh?
That is powerful. But choosing your attitude when things are falling apart, that can't be easy.
It's not. It's not about pretending the hard stuff isn't there. It's about understanding that we always have a choice in how we react to it. And part of that, I think, is learning to accept things as they are, including ourselves, you know?
So maybe real happiness isn't about being perfect, but about finding that smiling soul inside, even when things are tough.
And one of the most important keys might be meaning, finding a purpose in our lives, connecting to something bigger than ourselves. It seems like that's a common thread in different cultures and throughout history.
Now you've got me really curious. What do our sources say about how we actually find that meaning?
Well, before we get into that, let's look at what the YouTube video says about the different types of happiness, hedonia versus eudaimonia. It might help explain how we experience meaning.
Okay, I'm listening. Let's break down this hedonia versus eudaimonia thing.
Thompson describes hedonia as that simple, temporary pleasure, like having an amazing meal or getting lost in a good book. But eudaimonia, that's about thriving, about living in a way that matches your values, going after goals that make you feel truly fulfilled.
So it's like the difference between, let's say, binge watching a show and feeling entertained for a little while versus learning a new skill and feeling like you've really accomplished something.
Exactly. Or even think about being a parent. It's definitely not always fun, but for a lot of people, it's the most meaningful thing in their lives.
Right, so it seems like true happiness, this eudaimonia, isn't always easy or fun. It can even be hard sometimes, but in the end, it's more satisfying.
I like how you put that. And this actually goes back to what the website says about resilient thinking. Avoiding those all-or-nothing traps, finding a middle ground, it seems like that's super important for getting through those tough times and staying on the path toward a life that really means something.
Like finding a balance, right?
Yeah.
We talked about dieting earlier. Being too restrictive usually doesn't work.
You got it. But when we approach things with moderation and flexibility, we're more likely to make changes that last. And that's not just for our physical health, but for our emotional well-being and how we go after happiness, too.
So we shouldn't expect to be happy all the time. It's more like a journey with ups and downs, good times and bad times all mixed together. And maybe it's about finding that balance, that middle ground as we try to live a life that really matters.
You're getting it. It seems like everything we've talked about, from evolutionary psychology to that smiling soul idea to the 10 keys, they all point to this idea that real happiness might be tied to living a good life, a virtuous life.
Living a virtuous life. Now that's interesting. What does that actually look like, though?
Well, Thompson talks about 5 core virtues that seem to show up across different times and cultures: altruism, kindness, justice, wisdom, and humility.
So those aren't just random good qualities. They're like principles that are really ingrained in being human. Are you saying that living by these virtues is the key to happiness?
I wouldn't say it's a secret formula or anything, but it's definitely something to think about. Maybe the happiest people are the ones who try to live ethically, to really embody these virtues in their lives.
That brings up so many questions. How do we develop these virtues? Are some people just born with them? Can we actually change our behavior and become more virtuous?
Those are all good questions. And before we get into those, let's go back to that idea of finding meaning. Remember, we kind of left off on that, and I think our sources have some really interesting things to say about it.
Okay, let's dive back in. What do our sources say about finding that deeper sense of meaning?
Well, you know those 10 keys from the How to Be Happy Deeply website? It turns out that meaning is really connected to a few of the other keys, like giving, relating, and even trying out.
Okay, I can see that. It's not like meaning just falls out of the sky. It comes from what we do and the things we go through.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it when we do things like volunteering our time or just listening to a friend who needs to talk. We're connecting to something outside of ourselves.
It's not all about what we get, but also what we give.
And that giving can take lots of different forms. The website talks about how important it is to try out new things, to kind of expand our horizons, and to always be learning. That feeling of discovery and growth can be super fulfilling.
It's like that quote, "The purpose of life, after all, is to live it, to taste experience to the utmost, to reach out eagerly and without fear for newer and richer experience."
Eleanor Roosevelt, a great example of someone who really lived that way, always exploring and growing.
For sure. But let's be real, life isn't always about trying new things. Sometimes it's about dealing with the hard stuff, the setbacks and challenges that we all face.
And that's where those other keys come, in resilience, acceptance, even awareness. Remember, Johnny Thompson said that even negative emotions can be part of our overall happiness.
Yeah, he said something about how we need to acknowledge and accept those negative emotions so we can learn and grow from them, right?
Exactly. It's about embracing all of our experiences, even the tough ones, instead of trying to push them away.
Kind of like those thinking traps the website talks about. If we keep denying or fighting against our negative emotions, we're only making things harder for ourselves.
Like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It takes a lot of effort, and it's just going to pop back up eventually.
So how do we get out of those thinking traps and develop a more resilient mindset?
Well, the website suggests asking ourselves a few questions when those negative thoughts come up. Is there any proof for this thought? Or could I see this situation in a different way?
So instead of just believing those negative thoughts, we're challenging them and trying to find a more balanced view.
Exactly. And that goes back to the importance of awareness, being mindful of our thoughts and feelings without judging them. Practices like mindfulness and gratitude can be really helpful for developing that awareness.
The Wondermind article had some good tips on practicing gratitude, like taking a few minutes every day to write down things you're thankful for.
Those little things can make a big difference in how we feel overall. When we focus on the positive, we're training our minds to appreciate the good stuff, even when things are hard.
It's like those inspirational quotes you see everywhere. Gratitude turns what we have into enough.
That's it. And it's not just about feeling good. Research actually shows that gratitude can make our relationships stronger, improve our physical health, and even make us more resilient when we face difficult situations.
Wow. Now gratitude sounds like a superpower. But let's circle back to that idea of meaning. We've talked about how it connects to giving, trying new things, and even facing challenges. But how do we actually figure out what gives our lives meaning? Is there some kind of magic formula?
I don't think there's one right answer for everyone, but our sources give us some good clues. The website stresses the importance of making sure our actions line up with our values.
So figuring out what's really important to us and then living in a way that shows those values.
Exactly. It's about finding that place where our passions and talents meet the needs of the world.
That makes me think of something Johnny Thompson said in the YouTube video. He mentioned that all the big philosophical and religious traditions put a lot of emphasis on virtue and meaning.
And he pointed out those 5 core virtues again: altruism, kindness, justice, wisdom, and humility. It's interesting how those virtues seem to be important across different cultures and times.
So maybe finding meaning isn't about chasing something big and grand, but about living out those virtues in our everyday lives.
Maybe so. Think about it: when we're kind, when we fight for justice, when we approach life with humility and a desire to learn, we're naturally contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
And maybe that feeling of making a difference, of contributing to something good, is a key part of finding meaning and purpose.
It's definitely a powerful idea. And remember, the website also emphasized the importance of having direction, having goals that give us a sense of purpose and something to work towards.
So it's not just about wandering through life, but having a sense of where we want to go and what we want to achieve.
Exactly. And those goals can be big or small, personal or professional. The important thing is that they fit with our values and give us a sense of direction and motivation.
Okay, this is starting to make sense, but if I'm being honest, I'm still a little skeptical. Or is it really that simple? Can we really just choose to be happy by following these steps?
Well, I wouldn't say it's always easy, but our sources seem to be saying that happiness isn't just random luck. It's something we can actually work towards through our choices, actions, and how we think.
So it's not about waiting for happiness to happen, but about creating the right environment for it to grow.
Right. And remember, even though we've been talking about these things one at a time, they're all connected. It's like a web. When you tug on one thread, the whole thing moves.
So being grateful can make us more resilient, which can help us deal with challenges and go after our goals, which then leads to a bigger sense of meaning and purpose.
You got it. And that sense of meaning and purpose can make us want to give back to the world, which creates a whole chain of positive effects.
This is starting to sound like a recipe for a happy and fulfilling life. But I'm wondering, is there anything missing from this recipe? Are there any downsides to focusing so much on happiness?
That's a really important question,
Hmm?
and one we should definitely talk about. Before we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a minute to think about some of the potential pitfalls and challenges on the path to happiness. It's a good question. I mean, we've been talking about all these different ways to be happier, but is there a point where focusing on it too much becomes a problem? Could it backfire?
It's a thought, isn't it? I mean, could there be downsides?
I think so, yeah. Like, let's say we're always trying to reach this perfect idea of happiness that doesn't even exist. We might just end up feeling disappointed or like we're not good enough when we inevitably hit those rough patches.
It's like those social media feeds all over again, making us think we should be something we're not.
Exactly. And if we're so busy trying to be happy ourselves, we might forget about other people or become, a little too focused on ourselves.
So finding that balance again, right? Between looking after our own well-being and thinking about the well-being of other people.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that happiness isn't some finish line we cross. It's more like a journey. There will be ups and downs, unexpected turns, all of that. And that's okay. Actually, those challenges can often help us grow and understand things better.
So even the tough parts, the messy parts of life, they're all part of what makes it interesting and meaningful.
That's the idea. And maybe that's what we should take away from all of this. Happiness isn't something we just achieve and it's done. It's this ongoing process of learning, growing, connecting with others, and making a difference.
It's like we're developing those qualities inside us, things like resilience, gratitude, and compassion. And those qualities help us deal with challenges and really appreciate the good times even more.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that real happiness often isn't about chasing those fleeting good feelings. It's about living a life that matches our values, our passions, and what we feel our purpose is.
So if we're constantly chasing happiness, we might actually miss out on the things that bring us joy and make us feel fulfilled.
It's like that saying, the best way to find happiness is to stop looking for it. Maybe the key is to focus on living a life that has meaning, and then happiness will just come naturally.
Wow, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. We've explored so many different angles of happiness, everything from evolutionary psychology to practical tips for being more grateful and resilient.
And we found these fascinating connections between ideas that seem pretty different at first. It seems like true happiness isn't just about feeling good, it's about living a good life, making a difference in the world, and being open to all of life's experiences.
We started with these different sources, a website, an article, and a YouTube video, and somehow we've woven them all together into this tapestry of insights. It's way more interesting and complex than any one source could have been on its own.
And as we wrap up, I'm left with this thought, something that wasn't directly said in any of our sources but came out of our conversation. What if the very act of searching for happiness, that journey itself, is actually part of what makes us happy?
That's a really cool way to look at it. It's like the journey is just as important as the destination. Maybe it's the seeking, the effort we put in, the constant learning and growing that ultimately leads us closer to that smiling soul Thompson was talking about.
Exactly. And with that, we'll leave you with this final thought. What brings you joy? What gives your life meaning? What can you do today to cultivate those things?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into happiness. We hope you've gained some new insights and feel inspired to keep exploring this fascinating topic. It's a journey, after all.